He was just a security guard, invisible, forgotten. Until one night, Donald Trump stopped, looked him in the eye, and asked a single question that changed everything. What happened next shocked the nation. Watch till the end to find out. Like and subscribe for more thrilling stories. The Forgotten Soldier and the Fateful Encounter. The cold night air sliced through Jack Sullivan's uniform, but he barely noticed. He had learned long ago to ignore discomfort. The weight of his duty pressed heavier on his shoulders than the biting wind. Dressed in a navy blue security uniform, he stood motionless outside the massive government building, his boots firmly planted on the pavement. To everyone passing by, he was invisible. Just another faceless guard. Just another nobody. But Jack hadn't always been a nobody. Once he had been Sergeant Jack Sullivan, an elite soldier, a battlefield leader. 8 years of combat tours in the Middle East had forged him into a man who had stared death in the face and walked away unscathed, at least physically. But when he returned home, the world had no place for him. He had given everything for his country, only to come back and realize that the country had moved on without him. His medals meant nothing in the real world. His skills, tracking, security analysis, tactical strategy were useless outside of combat. The battlefield had rules. Civilian life, it was chaos. The worst part? No one cared. At first, he had tried to rebuild his life. He applied for jobs, sent out resumes, even tried to start his own business. But rejection after rejection wore him down. Employers didn't care about military leadership or combat strategy. They wanted college degrees, corporate experience, things Jack didn't have. And so after months of frustration, he settled for this: a security job at a government building where his only duty was to stand, watch, and be ignored. Every night, he guarded the same iron gates. Every night, he saluted men in suits and high-ranking officials who never even glanced his way. They stepped into meetings that shaped the country while he remained outside, a silent protector of a world that no longer included him. Until tonight. It started like any other night. Jack began his shift at 9 p.m., patrolling the same endless hallways, ensuring the heavy locked doors remained secure. He had memorized every inch of the building. He knew the blind spots of the cameras, the weaknesses in the security system, and the areas most vulnerable to an attack. Not that it mattered. No one asked for his opinion. No one cared what he saw. Until the convoy arrived. At exactly midnight, a fleet of sleek black vehicles rolled into the courtyard, headlights slicing through the darkness. Jack recognized the motorcade immediately. He had seen it many times before, but the man inside had never noticed him. Tonight, however, would be different. The armored door swung open, and a team of Secret Service agents stepped out first, forming their usual protective perimeter. Then, stepping out of the car in a sharp black suit, exuding authority with every movement, was Donald Trump. Jack expected him to walk straight inside, just like every other night. Instead, Trump stopped and looked directly at him. Jack stood at attention, his training kicking in automatically, but his mind raced. Why is he looking at me? Trump took a few steps toward him, his piercing gaze unreadable. The Secret Service agents tensed, their hands hovering near their weapons, prepared for anything. Jack had spent his entire career reading people, analyzing threats. But for the first time in a long while, he felt completely off guard. Then Trump spoke. "How's your night going, officer?" Jack hesitated. Of all the people who passed by him daily, not a single one had ever acknowledged his existence. Not once. He quickly regained his composure. "All good, sir." Trump nodded, but he didn't move on. Instead, he studied Jack for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. It wasn't just a casual glance. It was an assessment. Jack had seen that look before, on commanders analyzing soldiers before sending them into battle. Then Trump asked a question that made Jack's chest tighten. "You served in the military, didn't you?" The words hit like a shockwave. Jack blinked. He wore no medals, no insignia. Nothing about his uniform indicated his past. But somehow Trump had noticed. "Yes, sir," Jack answered. 8 years in the Army." Trump nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already suspected. 8 years is a long time," he said. "And now you're here." Jack felt something twist inside him. He knew Trump wasn't belittling him, but saying the words out loud, after everything he had been through, he was just a security guard, stung. "I handle security for this building, sir," Jack said, keeping his tone professional. Trump's gaze remained sharp. Then a small, almost knowing smile appeared on his lips. "Tell me," he said, "do you think this building is truly secure?" Jack's heart pounded. Is this a test? He had spent countless nights analyzing the flaws in the security system. He knew the weak points no one else saw. But who was he to challenge the system? To tell a billionaire, a former president, that the security of a government building wasn't good enough? Still, something in Trump's expression told him he wasn't asking for politeness. He was asking for the truth. Jack swallowed hard. "I believe we do our best to keep it safe, sir." Trump tilted his head slightly. "Doing your best doesn't always mean it's enough." Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "If you had the power to change the security system here," Trump continued, "what would you do differently?" Jack's throat went dry. He had dozens of ideas, plans that could strengthen security, fix vulnerabilities, prevent breaches. But no one had ever asked him, until now. For a long moment he was silent, debating whether to speak up. Then, against all instincts, against all logic, he said, "There are a few areas I believe could be improved, sir." Trump's eyes gleamed with interest. He gave a slight nod. "Good," he said. "I'll be back soon. When I am, I want to hear your thoughts." And just like that, he turned and walked inside, leaving Jack standing there, his mind spinning. Had that really just happened? Had Donald Trump just asked for his opinion? Jack wasn't sure if this was an opportunity or a setup for failure. All he knew was that for the first time in years, he wasn't invisible anymore. And if this was a test, he was going to be damn ready for it. A chance or a trap? Jack Sullivan had spent years surviving in the most hostile places on Earth. He had trained in urban warfare, counterintelligence, and advanced security tactics. But nothing, not the sleepless nights in the desert, not the sound of mortars raining down on his unit, not even the adrenaline rush of battle, had ever shaken him quite like those words from Donald Trump. "I'll be back soon. When I am, I want to hear your thoughts." It should have been a simple exchange, but to Jack it wasn't, because no one had ever asked for his thoughts before. The weight of an opportunity. For the next few nights, Jack couldn't shake the conversation. He had worked security at this building for nearly 3 years, watching powerful people walk past him without a second glance. Now, out of nowhere, one of the most influential figures in the country had singled him out. Was this a test? A joke? Or worse, was it a trap? Jack had seen it before. Higher-ups dangled opportunities in front of guys like him, only to watch them fail. Some corporate executive pretending to care about the little guy, just to make a point. But something about Trump's look, that sharp, calculating gaze, told him this was different. If he wasn't ready, if he didn't prove himself, this might be his one and only shot at something bigger. So Jack did what he had always done best. He prepared. The silent study. Instead of leaving after his shift, Jack started staying late. While the rest of the guards were joking in the break room or scrolling through their phones, he studied. He memorized every blind spot in the security cameras. He noted every weak checkpoint, every unguarded entrance, every potential breach point that could be exploited. He went back to his military training, diving into modern surveillance technology, cybersecurity protocols, and counter-infiltration tactics. Things he had once learned in the field, but never had the chance to apply. Within 1 week, he had built a mental dossier of the building's vulnerabilities. A dossier that no one else had. He just didn't know if it would matter. Until Trump came back. The moment of truth. 3 weeks after their first encounter, the convoy returned. The same sleek black vehicles, the same armored door swinging open. This time, Jack wasn't surprised when Trump stopped in front of him. "I told you to prepare some ideas, didn't I?" Jack stood at attention. His pulse pounded, but he kept his voice steady. "Yes, sir." Trump nodded. "Good. Let's hear it." Right here? Right now? Jack hadn't expected it to be like this. Standing outside in the freezing cold, Secret Service agents looming around him. But he didn't hesitate. Jack laid it all out. The flaws in the camera angles. The checkpoints that weren't truly secure. the outdated clearance procedures, the exact ways an intruder could bypass security without ever raising an alarm. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He spoke like a man giving a battlefield report. Clear, precise, no wasted words. Behind Trump, the Secret Service agents exchanged glances. They hadn't expected a regular security guard to deliver such a sharp, well-thought-out analysis. When Jack finished, Trump stood silent for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I like the way you think." Jack barely had time to process those words before Trump turned to one of his aides. "Set up a meeting. I want to see what he's capable of." A meeting? Jack's mind raced. What did that even mean? A real interview? A job offer? Or was this the trap? But before he could overthink it, something happened that changed everything. Because that very night, the building was breached. The red alarm, 2:14 a.m. Jack had just finished his final rounds when the security monitors lit up red. Intrusion detected. The alarm blared through the control room. Security personnel rushed in, scrambling to check the surveillance feeds. A frantic voice crackled over the radio. "Unauthorized access! West Wing, Sector 4. Jack's blood ran cold. Sector 4. That was one of the weak points he had flagged in his security analysis. Coincidence? No way. Jack rushed to the monitors, his sharp eyes scanning the footage. There, a figure, moving in the shadows. No broken locks, no forced entry. But somehow someone was inside. One of the senior officers frowned at the screen. "Might be a system glitch." Jack wasn't buying it. His gut screamed at him. This wasn't a false alarm. Someone was here. He grabbed the radio. "We have an intruder. I need a team to move toward the West Wing. Sector 4, now." The officers hesitated. This was above his pay grade. Who was he to start giving orders? Then another voice rang out, one that made the entire room snap to attention. "Do as he says." Jack turned. Standing in the doorway, looking dead serious, was Donald Trump. Silence fell over the control room. No one questioned the order after that. Within seconds, a tactical team moved in. Jack followed, his heart pounding, hand instinctively resting on his hip, where, for the first time since leaving the military, he wished he was armed. When they arrived, everything seemed normal. No movement, no sign of a break-in. Then one of the agents called out, "Over here, we found something." Jack rushed over. Tucked beneath an electrical panel near the building's main server room, hidden in the shadows, was a small black device, a data interceptor. Someone had attempted to hack into the government's security network. Jack's stomach tightened. This wasn't just a break-in. This was a coordinated cyber attack. And if they hadn't caught it in time, the consequences could have been catastrophic. Jack turned toward Trump, his heart still hammering in his chest. Trump studied the device for a long moment, then looked back at Jack. "I told you," Trump said quietly. "Doing your best isn't always enough." Jack exhaled, adrenaline still surging through his veins. He had spent years feeling useless, like his skills didn't matter. But tonight, he had just proven himself. Trump handed the device to a Secret Service agent. Then he looked back at Jack and said something that made his entire world shift. "Tomorrow, you're no longer a security guard. I have a new job for you." Jack's mind reeled. What the hell had just happened? Was this the break he had been waiting for? Or was he about to step into something much, much bigger than he ever imagined? The breaking point. Jack Sullivan had barely processed the weight of Trump's words before the chaos truly began. "Tomorrow, you're no longer a security guard. I have a new job for you." The words echoed in his mind as he sat alone in his tiny apartment that night, staring at the walls, his pulse still racing from the night's events. For 3 years, he had stood at those gates, ignored, forgotten. Now, in a matter of hours, everything had changed. But was it a blessing or a curse? Because if tonight had taught him anything, it was that something much bigger was happening behind the scenes. The trap springs shut 8 a.m. The next morning, Jack arrived at the government building, expecting a briefing, an explanation, something. Instead, 2 Secret Service agents met him at the entrance. "Follow us." No explanations, no details, just a direct march through the vast, sterile corridors, straight to a secure meeting room buried deep within the building. Inside, a group of top security officials sat at a long table. Jack instantly recognized Tom Hastings, the head of security operations, a man who had barely acknowledged his existence before now. Donald Trump was at the head of the table, calm but sharp-eyed, like a man watching a chessboard only he understood. Jack took a seat, heart pounding. Then Hastings dropped the bombshell. "We have a mole inside this building." Jack felt his spine straighten. "We believe last night's breach was an inside job," Hastings continued. "Someone with clearance planted that device near the main server. That means whoever did this has access. Real access. Not just a hacker on the outside trying to break in." Jack clenched his fists. He had suspected it, but now it was confirmed. Trump leaned forward. "That's where you come in, Jack." Jack's stomach twisted. He wasn't being promoted. He was being thrown into a firestorm. Hastings folded his hands. "You're the only one who saw the breach coming. You flagged the weak points before this happened. That tells us one of two things. Either you're damn good at your job," a long pause, "or you're involved." The room went silent. Jack's blood ran cold. "Wait, what?" "Hold on," Jack said, his voice calm but firm. "You think I had something to do with this?" Trump's expression remained unreadable. "I don't, but not everyone in this room agrees with me." Hastings leaned in. "We have to consider all possibilities." Jack felt his pulse hammering. They were looking at him like he was a suspect, like he was the inside man. The irony hit him like a punch to the gut. For years, no one had noticed him. Now, the moment he was finally being recognized, it was as a potential traitor. No way out. Jack could feel the weight of the room pressing in on him. The senior officials, the agents, even Hastings. They were all waiting for him to crack. But he had been trained for interrogation. He had withstood worse. "I've been working security here for 3 years," Jack said evenly. "If I wanted to compromise this place, I wouldn't have waited until the exact night I flagged a vulnerability to do it." Trump gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Hastings, however, wasn't convinced. "Then prove it." "How?" Trump finally spoke. "Find the real mole." Jack blinked. "You want me to investigate this?" Hastings leaned back. "You know the weak points better than anyone. You understand how an attack like this would be planned. And," his eyes narrowed, "since you're the one on our radar, consider this your chance to clear your name." It was a setup. He wasn't being given an opportunity. He was being given an ultimatum. Jack gritted his teeth. He could walk away right now, go back to being a nobody, let them point fingers and ruin his reputation. Or he could fight back. He looked Trump in the eye. "You're serious about this?" Trump nodded once. "Completely." Jack inhaled deeply. "Fine. I'll find your mole." The hunt begins. Jack had less than 48 hours to prove himself before Hastings would push for his removal. He had to work fast. Step 1. Who had access? The security clearance logs showed only a handful of people had access to the sector where the breach occurred. But there was one problem. One of them was already dead. James Connolly, a longtime security officer, had died in a car accident 2 weeks ago. His access card should have been deactivated immediately after his passing, but it wasn't. Someone had used his credentials to enter the restricted sector last night. Jack's stomach tightened. The mole wasn't just inside the building. They had deliberately kept Connolly's ID active so they could use it undetected. And the only people who could authorize that? Someone high up in security operations. Someone like Tom Hastings, the betrayal. Jack's blood turned to ice. Was Hastings setting him up to fail because he was the mole all along? If Hastings was behind this, he would do everything in his power to stop Jack from exposing him. Jack had 2 choices. Go to Trump with the evidence, risking that Hastings would shut it down before he could prove anything. Play along, pretend to be clueless. And catch Hastings in the act. Jack chose option 2. That night, he planted false information in the security logs. Fake vulnerabilities, fake weak points. Then he sat back and waited. If Hastings really was the mole, he would try to use that information. And 3 hours later, Jack watched from a hidden camera feed as Hastings himself entered the restricted area, using Connolly's still active ID. Caught, red-handed. Jack grabbed his radio. "Control room, lock down Sector 4, now." Within seconds, alarms blared. Security teams swarmed the hallway. Hastings barely had time to react before Trump himself walked in. For the first time, Hastings looked afraid. Trump stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "You really thought I wouldn't see it?" he said, his voice like steel. Hastings tried to speak. "Sir, I can explain." "No," Trump interrupted. "You can't." A long silence. Then Trump turned to Jack. "Nice work, Sullivan." Jack exhaled. For the first time since this nightmare started, he felt in control. The final reckoning. Jack Sullivan should have felt relief. He had exposed Tom Hastings, the head of security operations, as the mole. He had proven himself. He had survived. But something didn't sit right. It was too easy. Hastings was smart. He had been working in security for over 20 years. A man like that doesn't make sloppy mistakes, unless he wanted to be caught, which meant one thing. Hastings wasn't the real mastermind. He was just a pawn, and the real enemy, still out there. The last warning. Jack sat in the secure briefing room, watching as Hastings was escorted away in handcuffs by the Secret Service. The man didn't struggle, didn't resist. He just gave Jack a long, knowing look. And then, as he passed, he muttered under his breath, "You have no idea what you've just walked into." Jack's blood ran cold. Trump, standing nearby, caught the exchange. He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "What do you mean by that?" Hastings let out a slow, almost amused chuckle. Then he turned to Trump and said, "You think this ends with me?" A pause, then he smirked. "You're already too late." Before anyone could react, a massive explosion rocked the building. The final test Jack barely had time to brace before the walls shook violently, dust and debris raining down. The power flickered. Emergency alarms blared. Trump's security detail immediately surrounded him, ushering him toward the exit. But Jack wasn't focused on them. He was focused on the security feed still flickering on the screen. Multiple breach points. Sector 3, Sector 7, the server room. It wasn't just an explosion. It was a full-scale infiltration. Jack grabbed the nearest radio. "We have multiple intrusions. Repeat, multiple intrusions. This isn't over." He turned to Trump. "You need to get out of here. Now." Trump narrowed his eyes. "You're staying?" Jack nodded. "If we don't stop this now, they'll take everything." For a second, Trump studied him. Then he gave a single nod. "Then do what you do best." And with that, Trump and his team disappeared down the emergency corridor. Jack ran straight into the fire. The final enemy revealed Jack moved fast. Gunfire erupted down the hallways. Secret Service agents engaging unknown assailants. The air was thick with smoke. The smell of burning wires filled his nostrils. Then he saw it. Through the shattered security glass, a team of masked operatives moving toward the main server room. The real target. Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed the pistol from an injured security officer and charged forward. One shot, one choice. Jack took cover behind a fallen pillar, lining up his shot. 3 men, armed, professional. They moved with precision, too clean for common criminals. These weren't random mercenaries. They were trained operatives. Jack exhaled slowly. Then, he fired. The first man dropped instantly. The second whirled, raising his weapon. Jack was faster. A single shot to the leg, and the man went down screaming. The third, he turned. But instead of fighting, he ran. Straight for the server room. Jack sprinted after him, adrenaline surging. He reached the server room just in time to see the man frantically typing into a laptop, a virus upload racing toward completion. Jack didn't have time to think. He raised his gun and pulled the trigger. The aftermath. The silence after the gunshot was deafening. The masked operative slumped over the terminal, the upload frozen at 99%. Jack exhaled, his hands still shaking. He had stopped it. Barely. By the time reinforcements arrived, the intruders were either dead or captured. The damage? Severe but not catastrophic. Jack sat against the wall, his head resting against the cold metal. He had won, but at what cost? The final conversation. Later that night, after the fires were out and the security lockdown lifted, Jack found himself standing on the rooftop, staring over the city skyline. Footsteps approached behind him. He didn't have to turn to know who it was. Trump stepped beside him, hands in his pockets. "You did good tonight." Jack let out a dry chuckle. "Not exactly in the job description." Trump smirked. "Number? But that's why I picked you." Jack turned, frowning. "You picked me because I was standing at the gate." Trump shook his head. "No, Jack. I picked you because I saw what you could be." A long silence. Then Trump held out a folder. Jack took it cautiously, flipping it open. His eyes widened. "Security Advisor, White House Intelligence Division." Jack's breath caught in his throat. A real job. A real future. Not standing at a gate. Not being forgotten. This was everything he had been waiting for. He looked up at Trump. "You sure about this?" Trump grinned. "I don't give second chances, Jack. I give first ones to the right people." Jack exhaled. Then slowly he shook Trump's hand. Epilogue. The war never ends. Jack should have felt victorious. He had saved the building. He had exposed a traitor. He had stopped an attack. But as he stared at the folder in his hands, one thought nagged at the back of his mind. Hastings was just a pawn. The attackers, trained operatives. So the real question was, who sent them? And more importantly, what are they planning next? Jack had survived his first battle, but the war? The war was just beginning. The end. Or just the beginning? Final message to the audience. Jack's story isn't just about one man. It's about opportunity, courage, and the moment where everything changes. At some point, we all stand at a door, waiting to be noticed. The question is, when the opportunity comes, will you take it or will you let it pass you by?